welcome back to an episode of Storytime with Moto. Today we're talking all things koji. Why? Because koji is one of the primary ingredients of sake. And while you may be familiar with sake's other ingredients, which include rice, yeast, water, and sometimes some distilled alcohol, koji is something that you may never have heard of before. But given how crucial it is to the sake brewing process, and also how impactful it's been on Japanese food and beverage culture in general, we thought it would be a disservice if we didn't dedicate a whole episode on the topic. Before we get started, we've picked just the right sake for this topic. It is this sake right here. It is Zarusouhourai Tokubetsu Junmai. It's made by Oyatakashi Brewery in Kanagawa Prefecture. This sake, if there are any wine lovers out there, if you heard the little carbonation right now, it has a nice spritz to it. But I do like to refer to this kind of like an oak Sauvignon Blanc. Maybe we should have a sip first, actually. Bye. So yeah, it has a really lovely creaminess to it. It has the umami from the rice, but at the same time, it's balanced by a nice kind of palate cleansing minerality. And it's also fruity as well, as if you're tucking into a nice juicy peach or a melon. Let's kind of break down what koji is, because some people may not be aware of what it is. So it's actually a mold. Yes,
Are you sure you want to talk about it?
Yes.
The mold?
Yes.
In sake?
Yes, because it's not a gross mold that's dangerous, not at all. And you're gonna find out that you've actually been eating this koji mold so many times in your life. So yes, it's in sake, it's a mold, and it's actually Japan's national mold. And it may seem peculiar that a country could have its own national mold, but it makes sense because it's not only the secret behind sake, but also some things that you've definitely had before. Things like miso and soy sauce and mirin. So, these are things that if you've had anything Japanese, it's used one of these ingredients or the combination of all three. And it's definitely a classic in every Japanese kitchen. At least it is for mine. So koji mold is a secret to what makes all of these things. And the way it works its magic is basically whatever raw ingredient it's sprinkled onto, whether that be like soybeans or barley, or in sake's case, rice. It basically converts the starches found in these raw ingredients into fermentable sugars. So in the case of sake, once there's these sugars readily available is when the yeast can get added and convert it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So this obviously is a very simplified explanation of what happens in the sake brewing process. So if you wanted a more detailed explanation, we have a whole thing on our website about the whole sake brewing process in more detail, but today we're keeping it short and simple. And basically koji is that miraculous mold that converts starches in these raw ingredients into sugars. It is completely harmless, and actually not only does it do that practical function in sake brewing of converting the starches to sugars, but it actually also really impacts the flavor as well. And I would say that even though koji, and when I say koji, it's actually different than koji mold. So koji, even if you read on the back of a sake label, when it says koji, it's actually referring to rice with the koji mold inoculated onto it. So koji is basically the koji rice with the mold on top. So even though koji makes up around 20 to 30% of a batch of fermenting sake, it probably impacts the final outcome by around 80%. So it's huge for sake brewing. That's because it releases these amino acids, and these amino acids are not only actually really good for your health, it's actually really has tons of health benefits. It has these kind of rich, savory qualities as well. Things we love about sake is hugely impacted by koji. So until this point, I've kind of made it sound as if these sake brewers are just chucking in this mold and then the magic unfolds, but that's actually far from the truth. In reality, how well the koji works its magic is completely dependent on the skill and the dedication of the sake brewers. And it's also a reflection of centuries of practice and experience that's been passed down in the generation of these family breweries. And this is because how the koji works is completely dependent on the skill of the brewer to be able to inoculate rice in exactly the right amount and degree of the koji mold onto the rice. And this takes a lot of precision and a lot of care. And to expand on this a little bit more, basically each brewery has its own koji making room. And there's differences in each brewery. You know, some have the means to have a bit more mechanized things inside a brewery, but a lot of the breweries that we at least partnered with here at Moto, a lot of things are done by hand. So these breweries would have a koji room that just has a few beds. That's where the steamed rice goes on, and that's where they would inoculate the rice with the koji mold. And because heat and humidity are koji mold's best friends, these rooms are kept to like sauna-like conditions. It's super hot, super humid, so it's not the most comfortable place to do a lot of work. But under these kind of tough conditions is where these brewers have to, it takes around 30 to 50 hours sometimes to make a batch of koji. Throughout that course of time, they have to do all kinds of stuff. So they have to, you know, after spraying the koji mold onto the rice, they would then kind of gather it all into a mound, put a towel on it, then they would come back, spread it out, they take it to a different room. There's all these different things. So this is why a lot of the brewers say that this step, it's as if you're tending to a newborn baby, because it really, you know, it requires that much attention and care.
Yeah, true.
I also even have heard of a brewer who took it upon himself to personally check the koji every 90 minutes because, you know, he was the head brewer of this brewery, and he had this, you know, big sense of responsibility. So throughout the course of the brewing season, which is October to April, not one night did he sleep longer than 90 minutes. So he could continuously check on the bloody koji. So
he will just sleep by the room.
Literally.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of these brewers do kind of live in the brewery basically, or like in a house right next to it. So yeah, you're practically sleeping next to it, and then he was waking up every 90 minutes to check on the koji. So if that doesn't make you appreciate this stuff, I don't know what will, because I've never been that dedicated to doing anything in my life. Speaking of appreciating sake, this one, if we backtrack a little bit, there's 3 types of koji mold actually. Yellow koji is the industry standard for how to make sake. And if we're still, you know, sticking with the world of alcohol, then black koji is what's used to make awamori, which is a Japanese distillate indigenous to Okinawa, which is a southern region of Japan. And then there's white koji. It's usually used to make shochu, and shochu is another distillate of Japan, usually made in Kyushu area. Kyushu is another southern area of Japan. All of these different koji strains have different characteristics. Some are better suited for warmer climates. Some have higher levels of citric acid, so that's why brewers and distillers of different alcohols use different strains of koji. But instead of using yellow koji, which is the industry standard, Oyatakashi Brewery used white koji for this sake.
Ooh.
And that's what explains the higher acidity levels, that slightly more umami quality despite it being so fresh. And like I said, koji has such a function on the final product, and just by using this white koji, it has made a tremendous impact on the final outcome. But it was a great choice I think he made. In terms of acidity levels, it's kind of also about speed at which you break down, but I do think that just the white koji, if you use white koji, there tends to be higher acidity. That's why shochu as well tends to have higher acidity levels. Yeah.
And what kind of food would you pair with the white koji sake?
This one, I think it could go with, you know, deep fried foods. It could go, you know, with, just think of like fish and chips, calamari, all this kind of stuff. But this one in particular has a nice creaminess as well, and it's almost a little bit like lactic, if you will. So I'm thinking a lot of like Mediterranean food, things with like hummus and tzatziki and all this kind of stuff. That creaminess alongside the fresh ingredients would be really suited, I think, for this sake.
How about we try to just sprinkle the sake on fried chicken?